So we do have a quorum.
Great, we have a quorum. I'm gonna wait till 10 o'clock. My clock still says 9:59. All right, any reason not to start? I'm ready.
We're ready.
All right.
It's all you.
Okay, welcome everybody to the September 1st meeting of the Mountain Line Technical Advisory Committee. My name is Jeff Milbeck. I'm the Executive Director of Metro Plan and also recently voted the chair of this committee. So this is my first meeting and appreciate the opportunity to be here. That's the call to order. I'm going to ask Rhonda to do roll call.
Thank you, Chair and members of the TAC. Coconino County, Tiffany Kerr is expected, but not with us yet. Coconino County Citizen Representative Jillian Thomas.
Present.
Good morning.
Did you hear me? You heard me. Thank you.
Her alternate, Carol Covington, is also with us. Carol?
I'm here, thank you.
Thanks. City of Flagstaff, Jeff Bowman is expected, but not with us yet. City of Flagstaff Citizen Representative Michelle James.
Present.
Thank you. Metro Plan, Jeff Milbeck.
Here.
And we also have alternate Dave Wessel with us.
Good morning.
Morning. NAU Aaron Stom.
Hi, good morning, present.
Morning. We have NAU student Brendan Trashel. Did I say that right?
Traxel.
Traxel. Thank you for the correction. CCC, Kurt Stoll.
Present.
And Economic Development Citizen Representative Gail Jackson.
Here.
We have Chris Beecher, Mountain Line Attorney with us.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. And we have members of the Mountain Line staff here in the Vera room and on Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda. Next item number 3 is a safety minute. Sam Short, Safety Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Transit Advisory Committee. So the first safety minute for September is on train safety. You might have noticed that one of the crossings down here on Fanning has been broke for a while. Trains and railroad tracks are a common sight in Flagstaff. And while they may seem safe, trains are responsible for many injuries and property damage incidents each year. The great thing about trains is that they run a predictable path. Derailment is a very rare event. Due to this fact, it is often the action of others at railroad crossings or on the railroad tracks themselves that are contributing to the losses to occur. Never put yourself in danger when around trains or railroad tracks. Here are some tips for you to keep safe while you're around railroad tracks or railroad crossings. Always look both ways before crossing railroad tracks. Pay attention when you're near the tracks. Do not wear headphones or be on your mobile device. Never stop your vehicle on railroad tracks. Never attempt to race across a crossing to avoid waiting for a train to pass. Always obey safety signals at crossings. Never walk on railroad tracks unless you are crossing at a designated crossing. Give trains plenty of space when they are passing. As a pedestrian or in a vehicle, you have little chance to survive being directly struck by a train. Operation Lifesaver states that the force of a 30-car train hitting a vehicle is the equivalent of a car striking a soda can. Let us not imagine the result of a collision with an individual standing on the tracks. While injuries and fatalities are down from decades ago, it is still important to take railroad safety seriously And always observe the safety messages and signals when around railroad tracks or crossing tracks. Thank you and welcome to the September Transit Advisory Committee meeting.
Thanks, Sam. I have two questions, kind of points of order. There are some voting members as well as alternates. Am I correct that only one of those people can vote from each agency?
That's correct.
Okay. And then in terms of the camera, the owl camera, I noticed when Sam was speaking, he didn't, in my view, show up on the screen. Is that to be expected or was he being filmed?
That's correct, as to be expected.
Okay. All right. So item number 4 is call to the public. Do we have any members of the public who wish to address the TAC? Seeing none. Item number 5 is approval of TAC minutes from August 4th, 2022. Do I have a motion or comments from the TAC members?
No comment. This is Erin. I make a motion to approve.
A motion from Aaron. Is there a second?
I will second, Gillian.
And a second from Jillian. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, the minutes pass unanimously. Item number 6, stride forward, the regional transportation plan. We have a presentation from Dave Wessel.
I take it I just hit the button on the right. Move forward. We'll find out. Good morning, everybody. David Wessel, Planning Manager for Metro Plan, the Regional Transportation Planning Organization for the region. We encompass the same planning area boundary that outlined us. Today, I'm going to talk to you about Stride Forward, our next iteration of the Regional Transportation Plan. This is something we do every 5 years. We've been at this for a while now. Going to go over some of the scenarios that we're evaluating, the 2 scenarios we're evaluating, the effectiveness of the strategies as we see and understand them, and then open up to discussion, give a little overview of the type of policies we'll be developing and some of the next steps. So our current plan is Blueprint 2040. And a lot has changed since we've adopted that plan in 2017. Blueprint 2040 was instrumental in the passage of propositions 419 and 420. 420 is the Lone Tree Railroad overpass. And even though it was not on our fiscally constrained plan, we did set it up for discussion, and then ultimately voters approved that. We have seen the climate emergency and carbon neutrality plan adopted by the city, a housing emergency declared. We've seen grants for first and last mile connections for transit, and grants further supporting the downtown connection center. The IIJA/bill, this is the Investment Act that was passed federally, brought a lot of new funding opportunities. Not on there is crazy inflation, which is taking those funding and opportunities and slowly shrinking them, or steadily shrinking them. Then, of course, we've had COVID, which has made some changes. So as we move forward, let's use all these forward. We're looking at 2 scenarios, onward and upward. Onward is effectively staying the course while addressing all of these changes that we just mentioned. So the 2018 voter approved initiatives, which include several road projects, and bike projects, Lone Tree overpass. A key component of what we're required to do is maintain fiscal constraints. So this is our fiscally constrained process. And then looking at recent planning and development activity, key amongst those, it seems fairly certain that the hospital will relocate, and that is working into our assumptions for onward, which is a little obviously different than the plans that were in place at the time. But all of that said, we still want to make these projects as sustainable as possible and make some assumptions about that. Part of our charge in response to the changes since Blueprint 2040 is really to evaluate what happens in climate change. The carbon neutrality plan sets a goal and I'll list it, that this and others here shortly of maintaining our vehicle miles traveled at 2019 levels. So the upward scenario is really set for doing that. If we need to modify projects, we'll do that. We're looking hard at land use plans and shifts, density is a key part of this. And we're not being fiscally constrained. Everything in the kitchen sink, and all the money that we can imagine needed to reach that goal, consider. And then we'll not dictate policy approach, but we will present policies that could be considered as possibly necessary to meet that. So I'm just going to hit the punchline. We hit the goal. And in order to do that, we transfer 50% of growth, projected growth between now and 2030 into 2 target areas. We'll discuss those in a bit, but they're downtown, 4th Street. We invest a lot in pedestrian, bicycle, and transit, and we assume very successful work from home and travel demand management strategies. This little graph on the right, you'll see, hopefully you've seen before, you'll see throughout the presentation, it shows the most effective strategies and as they increase, and density is at the top, infrastructure is kind of in the middle, and these other strategies at the end in terms of effectiveness. So in order to meet that goal, we have a 50% growth transfer, and ped and bike levels of service or investment in infrastructure increases of 400%. That's a lot. But we'll put it in perspective here in a moment. As well as transit level of service increases of 200%. So I'm not going to walk you through how we arrived at that, but a little background first. So here are the road projects in Proposition 419, improvements to John Wesley Powell as a new project connecting to the airport, and the partnership project connecting to East 4th Street, improvements to Lone Tree Road, widening, multimodal improvements, and then Route 66 and investments there. Included, you can see in the bottom left, the significant improvements, about $29 million for pedestrian and bicycle. And then Proposition 420 is the Lone Tree Railroad overpass, indicated in the circle there, and within the Lone Tree connecting Butler to Route 66. Also, along with 419, 420, as I mentioned, we have carbon neutrality plan, and here are the goals there, and we'll be using these as benchmarks. VMT at 2019 levels, VMT in electric vehicles about 30%, 54% of trips taken by walking, biking, bus, and then commute trips, we don't have that analyzed, but that's a goal of 34%. And as a bit of context, from our Blueprint 2040, we did a peer comparison. This is somewhat dated information, but because of COVID, we feel it's still fairly relevant. If we were to do as well as our peer community, as the best of our peer communities, Boulder for transit, Corvallis for walking, and then we use Corvallis for biking, because I think Davis 1 is really extremely extremely high, but I also think that might be a typo. I can't believe they're at 71%. But we combine these other things, we hit 33.7%. And right now our mode share model for 2030 is about 14.5%. So need to boost that. You can get a sense of how far we need to go. So here's that graph again, and you can see on the left, transit-oriented design and density are two of the highest or most effective means. TOD is really kind of the density, but also how you design the neighborhood in relation to transit. And then you see parking, street connectivity. We're going to start with these density activities. So we proposed 3 possible patterns, focusing downtown, divided between downtown and 4th, or a corridor. We tested those, found nominal difference between the three, but a slight advantage to that middle option, growth divided between downtown and 4th Street, and then conversations with our advisory group and the Metro Plan Technical Advisory Committee felt that this was the one to further investigate. So, as I mentioned, nominal differences, but they felt that by splitting this, take some of the pressure off of historic properties in downtown. There's some vacant or underutilized land available, particularly on the east side of both of these areas. So there's redevelopment potential. As I mentioned, some support from our two groups there. We then started testing these density effects. And there is a correction here that I'll get to on the 100%, but you can see these diminishing returns. And this was just a kind of a blanket approach. We took 25% of all future growth, reduced it outside of these target areas, and shifted it into the target areas, and then 50%, and then 80%, and 100%. And you can see these diminishing returns. So 50% seems to be about the most effective. 100% didn't actually reverse, but essentially stayed flat. So there was no more return on that increased density. Why is this relatively small? We're looking at from now to 2045, 20% growth. And this is in effect out to 2030. So when you think about, we'll just call it 10% growth. You think about existing development, and we're taking 10% and shifting into these areas. It's relatively small, so its ability to move the needle is somewhat limited. So the next thing we're going to look at is how we, invest in facilities. And in our model, and this is we use the regional travel demand model. We look at levels of service or in infrastructure investments or service investments. For ped and bike, we look at levels of connectivity, both internally and externally. We look at the completeness of the planned system and whether crossings and the frequency and enhancement of crossings. For transit, we look at the number of stops available to an area, the frequency of the routes, and the number of routes. So the number of routes is really about accessibility. How many places can you get to via transit? The more routes you have, the more places you can get to. So here's some examples, illustrations. The top of the image on the left is a highly urbanized area. You can see lots of connections, both internally and externally to those blocks. Whereas we move into a more suburban or rural environment, those connections get broken. You see what's sometimes called oops and lollipops, dead worm style of streets that don't connect out to each other. So it's very hard to get places. And so how do you overcome that? You might look at connectivity, like you see in the lower right here. There's some fairly good examples of that in Ponderosa Trails, for example. Enhanced crossings, you can see kind of good, better, and best. A rapid flashing beacon or a signal would be a little bit better than that. Or the most enhanced crossing, obviously a great separation. And then in terms of system completeness, here's a relatively simple map. The existing bike lanes are in blue and those in red are missing. So how well are we doing completing the system? How complete is the system in terms of how it performs? And then more transit. This is an image from Curitava, Brazil. This is a bus that carries 250 passengers. And they come in very frequently, 1 or 2 minutes. And they also have some pretty exciting means of loading the bus as well. So these are the kind of things we might consider. So when we look at this 50% growth transfer and these level of service improvements, you can see it gradually increases the level of service that we threw out there. The first one does have some transit increases, but they're fairly modest, targeted mostly with the target areas and then general increase. And you can see we start creeping up on that VMT goal. The onward scenario started about 16.4% off the target. And so as we start shifting the growth and increasing the levels of service, you can see increases in both the BMT, approaching the BMT goal and increases in multi-mode share. Want to investigate this bottom right number. That's a huge increase when transit goes from 200% to 300% increase. Double check that number. It's not a typo. But I think the model might be a little hypersensitive as we greatly ramp up ped and bike. Pedestrian infrastructure is a key component of transit success. And so, there may be a tipping point. We'll investigate with our consultant modeling and see if that's a reasonable assumption there. But we're really approaching that 54% goal as well as approaching the BMT goal. So you can see that here and highlight this line here in particular because this could be very similar to the bottom line here. And this is the 80% growth scenario with the same increments being added to these infrastructure and service improvements. And with a 300% increase in level of service and that 200% increase in transit service, we get to this a very similar 7.5 versus 7.6%, and that's similar mode share at that same level. So why is that important? Because we have kind of two options here. When we throw in work trips, work from home, and we throw in travel demand strategies, and again, this is when these are working about as well as it can possibly work, we get another 8% reduction on top of that. And so if we're at 7, we get another 8, bingo, we've hit the mark. Work from home, we're really seeing that as the COVID effect. And so it kind of stands alone. It's often considered part of TDM strategies, but we're thinking, we're kind of there already. And that's something that we promote further with TDM strategies. For TDM strategies, we have done a literature review. We looked at the maximum reduction available for each of these strategies and then dampened them based on the number of trip types they apply to, the areas they would apply to. We took the upper range of effectiveness. We looked at kind of 50 to 80%. You're not going to be 100% effective with all of these, as well as some of these kind of overlap. And so these are not cumulative, where you just add these. So 5.2% seems reasonable based on the literature and the factors. But when we apply all of those, you can see with the 50% growth, that line, the bottom two lines, we hit the mark, and we're there. Similar with 80% when we apply the TDM and work from home strategies. Again, we hit the mark. Based on a conversation with our advisory group, felt that 50% transfer was probably more reasonable. Yes, ambitious, but more reasonably ambitious than 80% growth transfer. And so that's the one that we're going to continue to investigate and develop. I mentioned connectivity as a fairly important strategy. This was from a analysis we did for Blueprint 2040, where we threw a lot of new connections in and looked at their effectiveness. You can see there's some pretty big ticket items on here, the Lone Tree TI. Traffic interchange here, a connection of Squatcher Canyon, under 66, under Butler, under I-40, over Bow and Arrow, and up to John Jose Powell, as well as some smaller connections. As far as moving the needle, it was about 0.2% on BMT, further reduction. So we believe connectivity is important. You might recall from the discussion on pedestrian bicycle improvements and that level of service, connectivity is kind of baked into those numbers. So when we're cranking up that 400%, we're putting in new connections in places. So that's there. And we do believe that places like Milton and Fourth Street are good candidates for an urban style growth and need some connectivity that can help mobility, particularly by ped bike. So there's that 0.2% reduction. That was in the 80% scenario. So some of the observations we made, and I'll modify this based on that recent correction to the 100% growth, we still believe it applies. So work from home, transportation, demand management have a large effect. When you look at this, we're going from 16% down to 0%. Half of that was achieved by these strategies. They're not free, but relative to large infrastructure and service improvements, they're fairly cost effective. And I may defer to Miles to speak to how we would address that. As I mentioned before, the density shifts are not that powerful because we aren't projecting a lot of growth. We do see some things that are interesting. As I mentioned, there's not a reverse effect, but we kind of stopped gaining any benefits by going from 50 to 80 and then to 100% growth shift. A couple things may be going on here besides the kind of law of diminishing returns. Those areas are going to be congested. And so people may be taking longer trips to get to them because now they're more dense and more attractive because we're shifting. I don't think I said this before, both population and employment growth into those areas. Also, as they become more attractive, as they become more dense and larger, people may be shifting their patterns. It's a gravity model. So if you remember your high school physics, distance and mass, something larger is more attractive. And so people may be actually shifting their travel patterns to go to these areas, creating some increased BMT. And then we, looking at that, we did do one test run. We'll do more to refine this. We lowered the amount of employment that we shifted and actually found some BMT benefit. So, by starving areas, if you will, of their shopping and work opportunities, we may actually be creating this need for longer trips. So we'll be refining that as we move further. So there's lots of opportunities for policy, land use, in terms of how do you influence that density shift. What are your standards and targets for these enhancements to pedestrian, bicycle, and transit infrastructure and service? How are you going to support TDM? Curb management one is an interesting one in terms of is associated with maybe parking prices, but also with ride hailing and other things. How do you create opportunities to take advantage of that resource in a way that's sustainable? Mentioned EVs, we're working on a policy with that. And then this policy considerations for BMT. Not all BMT is equal necessarily. You can look at, well, if it's electric vehicle, maybe that BMT is okay. If it's focusing some of these enhancements, maybe there's equity considerations. Maybe there's development sites where very large development, expect a lot of them in reducing BMT, maybe small business, not so much. So there's policy considerations that we can take into effect. So our next steps moving forward, and we'll get into questions and answers here for a bit. As I mentioned, we're going to refine that upward scenario. We're going to flesh out these policies. We're going to compare those policies to fairly extensive public outreach that we've had. Let's see how it stacks up. We'll be making policy recommendations as we wrap this up through October and December 1st adoption. Because of the fiscal constraint, we'll be moving in the onward direction for adoption, but we will say, here's upward, here's one possible scenario, here's what we think that can be done to meet it. For transit, we're going to try to refine that 200% increase. Where will those bus transit routes be? Where do we think microtransit van pools and other things and for those respective levels of service in these different areas and try to get that 200% increase in service, but targeted. So it kind of spells it out for people. So with that, I'll wrap up and see if there's any questions that you might have.
Questions for Dave? Or comments? What's that? Thank you. Aaron Stum.
And I was trying not to just shout out like I normally do. So thank you. Thanks for laughing. Thanks, Dave. Great. A lot of information. Great information. I have 3 comment questions. The first one is just in terms of being easier, because I assume you're going to be presenting this at other places. It would be easier to follow some of the data if that target number was in the slide where you showed the potential impacts, just because I was trying to remember, like, was it 13.4? I couldn't remember the exact target number. So that would help that particular slide for some of the data. Question, can you tell me why the preferred choice was the 4th Street downtown as opposed to the one that went all along 66? I was just curious if there was a reason why. I thought when I saw that first, I thought kind of, I mean, I know we don't want to sprawl or spread out, but it did seem like that would then, I know people get so concerned about us becoming Phoenix. And so maybe if it was, I thought that would have been the preferred one. Can you explain why the 2 hubs was kind of the preferred?
Yeah, so we actually did model runs against those 3 scenarios. And I believe that the corridor one was the worst, although again, the differences were fairly nominal. Part of the challenge of a corridor scenario is, especially along 66, is you can only load one side of the street for most of the way. And so it makes service
Okay.
and access by pedestrians from the other side of the street fairly difficult. The other is you do spread things out. And one of the challenges, and we actually heard this from Portland, which is, the planning mecca, everything's very dense, and that you cannot satisfy all your trip ends in one location. And so you end up having to go to multiple locations, and that drives you towards making an automobile trip instead of a pet bike or transit trip. So these kind of strong hubs where you can satisfy more trip ends in one location tend to be more effective.
That last point is really impactful. And again, I would say maybe add that to the slide to explain the rationale why that was the preferred. And that last one really says a lot. So thank you. And then my last is just a comment. I would just, because we have obviously looked at various TDM for campus to control congestion, demand for parking, all of that. And one of the recommendations is just increase the parking fee. And the caution that I give or that I share in my opinion with folks is being mindful for those that transit is not an option. And we know in our community, we have many outliers outside of the transit route that have no choice but to drive. I mean, hopefully carpool if they can, or reduce their trips if they can. So I would just be careful if we're raising parking fees. Who are we? Are we impacting people that we're not giving? There is no other transit choice for them. If there's a transit choice, like we've talked about in the past, where maybe there are park and rides, again, on the outside where it reduces still the congestion and the miles traveled and personal vehicles on the inside, that would at least give people choice to have transit be part of their journey. We have a lot of people that are struggling financially, and often they live on the outsides, right, of the outsides of transit. And I would hate that now we're, increasing the parking fee to deter people from driving for people that don't have a choice, or maybe just a much harder choice.
Thank you, Aaron. I think that's an excellent comment. There's kind of the flip side to equity that sometimes we overlook.
And I know Jeff Bowman also has his hand up.
Thank you, Dave, for the presentation. That was really interesting. Usually I've seen these a couple of times before I get to this meeting, but I hadn't actually seen this yet, so thanks. I had a similar thought on the target number. I know you covered it early, and I'm sure it's imprinted on in your head, on your hand, but it isn't for me. And so I was kind of the same, like, wait a sec, what was the target again that we were trying to get back to? So I would, as Aaron said, find a way to incorporate that either at the end to just put it in writing in front of people, or even on the screen a couple of times as you go forward. And then, and I was actually wondering if you wouldn't mind backing up to that slide, because I wanted to look at, I don't know that I fully absorbed your slide that talked about Corvallis twice and maybe Portland, and how that compared to our target number. I just wasn't quite keeping up with that. And then my second, and maybe I'll wait to ask my second question because it's also, yeah. So combined peer, the top of the 3 combined peers is 33.7, and you're shooting for 54.
That's the carbon neutrality plan goal. We hit 32% roughly with the upward model, and essentially stopped there because we also hit the VMT goal at that point.
Okay. So they're not all in alignment. That makes sense now. That's why I wasn't maybe tracking that as well. And then can you describe again the growth just go through the growth transfer, like what, I think I've asked this before maybe, but I still don't fully understand. How does that happen? I mean, I get how you model it, but how does that actually happen in the real world?
So that's where the policy development takes place, and in a properly right state like Arizona, that's perhaps more complex or difficult. But there are some devices you could use. One is called transfer of development rights, where you might take an area projected for higher growth, where you see that as counterproductive, maybe the area south of I-40. So that becomes your development. So they have rights to that development, but now they also have a pool, the ability to sell those development rights. And they can only sell those into your target areas. Part of the challenge that we face is many of our target areas are already zoned for fairly high growth. And so what's the ability to create an incentive for sales there? But that is one device that can be employed. Another would be creating incentives for that growth. Maybe there are density bonuses that you can grant aside from the transfer development rights. Maybe there are regulations you can relax, parking requirements, relax further in these areas. The other might be just where you place your investments. And there can be a push-pull to that. You invest in the target areas and you defer investments in areas that you don't want growth. If these areas want to grow and they need that infrastructure, you put the onus on them to pay for it. Meanwhile, you're investing in these other areas. So to some degree, you're subsidizing growth in these target areas. So those are 3 examples.
And that last one is definitely a challenge. Oh, sorry, I was just gonna follow up. That last one is definitely a challenge because, yeah, our plans are not necessarily, the city's plans are not necessarily for investment in these areas today. This is what you're trying to influence. Yeah, thank you. And then just one clarification on the growth 50%, if I can have one more minute. That means 50% of future growth between now and that time period.
Right.
Okay.
So very aggressive by 2030.
And what is baseline growth in those 2 areas? Without any changes.
I have to get back to you on that. I'll share this. It's kind of preliminary. We're investigating, but I know one of the concerns that were expressed in our public outreach is density concerns, and as we put 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 5 to 6 stories, the discomfort or dissatisfaction with that increased. As we look at this transfer growth into these areas, and again, it was the kind of the east side of downtown and really kind of the east side of 4th Street. The projected density, even with this transfer at the 80% level, was about 13 units per acre. So relatively modest. So I don't know if that helps, but in these target areas, there's not a lot of residential development at this point. A lot of parking lots So you can really increase the intensity.
Okay.
That-
I'm gonna
That
go to
helps a lot.
Jillian.
Thank you.
Jillian. And you're on mute.
Unmuted. I have a couple of questions. Could we go back to the slide where you put projected road projects with Yale, Fourth?
Oh, the connection slide?
Yes, the connectivity. Could you, I don't quite know what those projects are. Yale Street, West Route 66. I know Beulah Boulevard, that's been talked about a lot because of the current project with taking traffic off Milton, and King Street. I mean, I know the area because I live by it, but I didn't quite understand what those projects are.
So if I actually go to the screen and point, can they see me do that?
Yeah, the map is too complicated, it has a lot on it.
With all of them?
It will, but it takes a second to.
Just know that it will, the camera will follow you, it just may be a small delay. You have to talk.
I have to talk to, all right.
There you go, you're on.
All right, here I am. So, you mentioned a number of projects. So here in Milton, this is the Beulah Boulevard extension. This is the University Avenue. So now we're creating some interconnectivity there. To improve on this, here's Yale Street. Could it be punched across to Reardon Ranch Street? Similarly, here's Plaza. Can it be connected through the Safeway Shopping Center up to Met's Walk and create some improved connectivity? These would be roadway projects. Not shown, but potential on the east side would be a connection of an improvement of Reardon Ranch Street up to West Route 66, and maybe even connecting through the Target parking lot down to University. This creates better circulation for cars off the main artery, but also creates opportunities for pedestrians and bikes to travel on lower volume roads and have crossings. Similarly, here in the 4th Street corridor, if you're familiar with 4th Street, the east side of the highway or the roadway have a lot of kind of traditional, conventional strip parking lots. As those redevelop, can we create connectivity back to King Street? Can King Street come out to 66 and create that block structure similar to downtown, where we have really good ped bike and transit performance, and start creating something more similar to what you see on the west side of 4th Street, and create those crossings. There's the city put in those rapid flashing beacons in a couple of locations. I think that's really improved the situation. But can we continue to make that better?
Yes, there aren't enough crossings on 4th now.
Right. And
People
then
running across 4th Street.
yeah, and then similarly, along West Route 66, can this connectivity be improved across Blackbird Roost and parallel some of those areas where they're actually, I think people are finding their way through there via some parking lots and other things, but could those actually be enhanced to be true roadway connections? So I'm going to stop there in the interest of time, but I hope that gives you a little context of what we're thinking about.
Fine. So maybe what when you do it, the presentation to the board, maybe it's the point being the connectivity, not just for the car, but for the boat. Just emphasize that's what the new roadways are going to be trying to tackle the problem. I wasn't picking that up so much when you made your initial run through.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dave, for your presentation, everybody for the questions and feedback. And if we're done, I'm going to move on to the next agenda item. Item number 7 is a review of the draft board business agenda. 7A is the consent agenda, under which we have 2 items. Items on the consent agenda are usually not discussed by the board or considered routine in nature. I'll just ask the technical advisory committee if they want to pull anything off for discussion here, or Heather, if you have anything you or your team wants to share before you move on.
I have nothing in particular to share. We'd be happy to answer any questions if any of the members have a question.
And any questions from the members? Okay, and I'm going to ask Rhonda, I guess, or James, if somebody on the screen raises their hand, sometimes I miss it on my screen, so thank you. All right, moving on to discussion action items. Approve the fiscal year 2022 annual report. I am speaking slowly to give Heather time to approach the podium. And Heather.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am not Josh. I am Heather. Josh did prepare the presentation that we're going to go over. I'm going to do the best that I can to represent the notes that he shared with me. So this is our fiscal year 2022 annual report. And as a reminder, the annual report is a requirement of being an IPTA. So it's actually written into the Arizona Revised Statutes that allows us to operate as a transit authority, requires us to have an annual report submitted to the state within 120 days of the end of the fiscal year. So this is a very technical report, and that it just really captures the data for our performance of our programs. We'll go over performance measures as well as budgetary or expenditure information. Try and do both. So we'll start by looking at areas of performance report. So these are just a couple of highlights for fiscal year 2022. We continue to work on strategies for recovering ridership as we come out of COVID conditions and encourage people again to use the bus and embrace that alternative mode of transportation. One of our challenges is our staffing. So we have been hyper-focused on recruitment and retention of our staff. Very appreciative of the support of the TAC and the board for the pay raise in October of 2021 that really changed the retention of staff. We had about 6 staff that were threatening to leave at that time. We've managed to retain them all and minimize the number of staffs leaving for pay reasons since that date. And we have significantly improved the number of applications we are getting for our positions. I'll focus a little bit on STIC, the Small Transit Intensive Cities funding. That's extremely important funding to our community. We are receiving all 6 benchmarks. We are one of 11 communities across the nation that is achieving that. And it's been a lot of hard work over the years to understand what those benchmarks are and even strategizing about how we introduce service to help make sure we stay competitive for those benchmarks. And as a reminder, the benchmarks they're comparing our performance to large urban systems like Valley Metro. Under the new bipartisan infrastructure law, this did bring $1.9 million to our community this past appropriations cycle, as compared to $1.2 million in the prior year. There is a notation on ARPA and CARES funding here, and just as a reminder, that's not new money. That is money that was appropriated to us during 2020 and 2021. We just finished spending it in the 2022 cycle year for our operating costs. So we now have, I think we have a little bit of preventative maintenance still out there lingering, but for the most part, we have spent 100% of our CARES funding as well as the American Rescue Plan funding. And we're very proud to be able to thank our legislators and congressmen for that money by getting it spent timely. And the last thing is we are continue to be very focused on the Downtown Connection Center. It is our highest priority. But one of the things we don't capture in here is that we have started exploring other projects. We started our CDL testing and training course project, planning and design of that workforce development tool, as well as looking at updating the CASPAR, this property's master plan. So we've outgrown our maintenance phase. We know we don't have enough in-building storage for fleet as we add them, and of course going electric requires additional infrastructure. So all of that project was kicked off during 2022 as well. We're going to go into looking at the actual performance by program. So starting with the Mountain Line bus system, This is our monthly graph. We use it on a regular basis. It is available on our website. We do look at ridership over the last several years. I want to note we've kept fiscal year 19 on here so that you can see what was it pre-COVID. We still think that's a very important comparison when we talk about ridership, because that was the last time things were normal, if you will. The lightest gray line is 2020. The darker gray line is 2021. And you can see in April of fiscal year 2020 is really when ridership started to take a huge dip. And that's really when our community started responding to the pandemic and we introduced reduced service. Our biggest challenge to returning to pre-COVID levels of ridership is really related to the university and the college. They make up about 50% of our ridership. They stayed in hybrid classroom formats through most of last year. So we hope to start to be able to present numbers that show that return of that ridership, which like I said makes up about 50%. If we take the the Route 10 ridership out, we're about 60% of normal ridership on all of our routes. So here are the performance measures the board has adopted for us, looking at passengers, hours, and costs to evaluate the standards for effective and efficient service. For the bus, our passenger trips increased 40%, so that was good news. We'd like it to increase even more and hope to be able to report that in the coming year. The average trips per day is at 3,587 passengers per day. Our total cost per trip did go up over the prior year by about $15. In large part, that was associated with the wage adjustment that we offered in 2022. And also we saw a significant increase in fuel. We actually ended the year 70% over budget on fuel due to rising cost of fuel. And then additionally, not really revealed obviously here, is we did have some service reductions, which means less service hours. We had all the same staffing costs. So that doesn't always correlate. This is looking at our paratransit program, the door-to-door ADA and non-ADA service that we provide. Overall ridership for paratransit continues to be lower than in prior years, with a dip in the winter. Really, those are expected behaviors. This is our most vulnerable population. So whenever community numbers spike with illness or we have poor weather, we see a larger percentage of cancellations in this program. With a lot of the program centers closed or on modified schedules, like the adult center or the education and job centers for some of our disabled folks, we do see less ridership projected. Right, so this is moving to the taxi program. So the taxi program is available both through the city of Flagstaff and Coconino County. These are for passengers who qualify for paratransit. So these are riders choosing to use a taxi instead of paratransit. We do provide a very small scale service outside the city of Flagstaff or Coconino County. It is within the metropolitan planning boundaries. So it's not Williams, it's not outside of our local area, but we do have some trips provided there. The top portion combines the ridership. So these are combined totals for the city and the county program. An average of 446 trips per month have been provided by taxi, and it's been pretty consistent throughout the year for the city of Flagstaff. And here are the performance measures for both of those programs that are funded by the city of Flagstaff. Paratransit performed 1.8 trips per hour. That's a real high mark of efficiency for us. How many people can we get on the bus in an average? We'll tell you we had some contractual requirements that limited how many people we put on the vehicles. So we did actually run more vehicles than we would in a normal scenario for paratransit in that regard. And the city taxi program, 5,350 trips. That does represent a savings. Every time a rider chooses a taxi or TNC, which are both allowed under our program, we save money because those trips are much cheaper to us because we're transferring the liability and a lot of other things over to that program. And those trips actually saved us $351,000 in the fiscal year. Moving on to look at Coconino County's programs. These are the programs that Hope and Union County helps to contribute and provide, and they do extend outside the city limits. This is our dam pool program. It was initiated in 2015, and fiscal year 2022 had approximately 50 users, 6 vans doing peak service, and this is up 15% from our previous year. We are seeing additional interest in this program with increasing fuel prices. I know we have a meeting to talk about some employers in the Belmont area that are looking for maybe a van pool or other transit service to help provide them access to employees. Because employees want to work there, but they want to drive out there. So how can we be part of that equation? Clicking the wrong button. And again, this is the, yes,
Can you go back to that last slide?
yes, sir.
Because it looks like this program dropped in ridership less than the other programs through COVID.
That is correct. Many of these programs, and I'll look to Busy and Key to help me. I'm not as in touch with this data as I once was in my prior position, but many of these programs are funded by employers. And so they stayed in service to make sure employees got to places like Chuba City's Medical Center, just as one example. So we did not see the same change in demand and ridership in the van pool program.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Busy? No. Great, thanks. So this is the same table at the top as we looked at before, but at the bottom is an updated graph. This shows the county taxi program. And you can see really between 21 and 22, fairly flat across that program. And similarly the same for 2021. There are not a lot of riders using this because it is such a limited geographical area to the city of Flagstaff. Sorry, I lost my word there for a moment.
Can I just another one on that if I could? And looking at this, it looks like the graph at the bottom, it shows it's somewhere under 100
Correct.
trips, but the numbers above are 400, 500, 700.
Remember the top table is the city and county combined.
Okay,
The bottom table is only the county trips. If we went back to the slide that had the city of Flagstaff, it had the difference.
okay, thank you.
So these are those performance measures for Hope and Union County that we report on a regular basis. Van pool performed just under 10,000 trips, covering 89,000 miles. And to Jeff's point, the program did rebound to pre-COVID levels, and we added an additional vehicle. So that one was quick to recover. The county taxi program, 640 total trips, and we did see a drop in demand of about 3%. Any other questions on the performance of the programs? I'm going to move into financial data. Any hands online? All right. And keep steamrolling along. And please feel free to interrupt if there are questions as we go. Fiscal year 2022, make sure I got the right ones. Mountain Line's revenue sources included contributions from each of our partner agencies, so that's City of Flagstaff and Coconino County, Northern Arizona University. And then Arizona Department of Transportation, and I think you all know this, but I'll say it again. That's actually federal revenue that ADOT gives to us. It is not state revenue. Federal Transit Administration, and then we have fares and contracts. The revenues are paid directly to Mountain Line and tracked by program. So here's the breakdown of those revenues by major sources. I'll get all of his notes. I wanted to notate the federal funding that you see here is funds required for expenses made. This is not reflective of the appropriations or the awards that we have. We recognize those when we make the expenditure because all of our federal funding and even our partner funding is reimbursement basis. So what you see here are the revenues we received based on the expenses we made and not necessarily reflective of what was collected in transit tax or what was awarded by FTA. These are the expenses by program.
Actually, I have a question from Gail.
Great.
Can she jump in?
Absolutely.
Hi, Heather. I'm sorry. I'm not understanding the breakdown. So the fares other, the 4%, that's the city, or is the partners, like, I'm confused on partners versus fares other. What does fares other mean?
The fares is a combination of three different things, two majority. It's the fares that we collect from pass sales to the amount a passenger pays when they are on a vehicle. But it does also include what Northern Arizona University pays because the students ride for free on Route 10, and so FTA defines that as a fare. So that is in that category. And then we have some small operating contracts that we attribute to that as well. So those are all under the fares and other. We could isolate them, but some of them are so small, they don't even show up on pie graphs and donut graphs like this. We just combine them as other sources. And then the partners, I think that's the other one you asked about, is truly the City of Flagstaff pays to us, Coconino County pays to us, and City of Flagstaff is our major funding partner, so that's why they are the biggest part of this. Did I address your question?
You did. I guess I think you explained the NAU piece. I would think that they were a partner, but it sounds like they're just a fare based on regulations from the federal government. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, yes. But I will offer, Gail, I think it is something we could footnote in the presentation just to be really clear, because we call them a partner, but this report, fulfills those federal and state requirements, and so therefore we report it as the federal government does require for our transportation program.
Got it. I appreciate the additional information. Thank you.
Thank you.
So sometimes most times, the legends on these things are small and hard to read, and it's very difficult to change that, I get it. So what I'm reading here is that fares and other is actually the 9%. And out of curiosity, my recollection is that has traditionally or historically been closer to 17. Is that correct?
Yes. So when we are in 2.5 million riders, you will see the fares category actually closer to 22, 23% with NAU. If I pull NAU out, it's more in the 15 to 17% range.
Mm-hmm.
But remember, FTA requires us to report it as a fare, and that jumps us into the 20 to 22.
Which seems like an accurate way to
Right.
actually characterize that. So
Right. So right now, we're running all of our service programs, so our costs are what they are, but that does mean our fare recovery is much, much lower than it would normally be, or what we strive for it to be.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Heather, just to follow up on that. So this slide represents something like 12 or so $1 million of operating.
12.9 million.
Huh?
12.9 million.
Okay. Operating only, not capital.
I believe this is 100% of our revenues needed for expenses, including capital expenses. We
Okay.
had a lot of planning expenses this year, but not shovels moving dirt expenses, which is where we start to see high capital costs. We didn't buy any vehicles this year. We didn't build a building yet. So our capital costs were not extremely high this year.
Okay, thank
The
you.
majority of this is operating. And we're going to go into those two expenses by detail, or expenses by program, and then we'll go to total expense breakdowns. So this is how the expenses break across our programs. Majority of our program is our bus program. And Josh did footnote that this is inclusive of capital and operating costs by program. This is how our expenditure breakdown. So Jeff, to your point, here's what the capital was in that 12.9 million. It was 2.4 of the 12.9. Majority of our expenses are in salaries and benefits. We pay about 44 cents on every dollar in wages. So just to give you an idea, our benefits are about 44% of our wage costs, or 44% of our wages are reoccurring as costs and benefits for our staff. And then maintenance and operating would be our other significant costs in our operating. And that's where our fuel is up, as well as maintenance of our vehicles. We are starting to see maintenance costs go up. One, cost escalation. Two, our vehicles are, I hate to use the word aging, but they are aging. They are no longer under warranty. They're no longer, the newness has worn off. And so we're starting to run into standard maintenance issues more so than we have in the past years. But the cost, the shipping has all escalated on this as well. Any questions on this slide? All right. So breaking down into our programs, we do have a program called the General Fund. So this is a program that is non-federal money, local money only, and it's really maintenance costs. As an agency, what do we have in costs? There's no salaries, there's no benefits. This is a very small contribution or expenses that we have for memberships, for sponsored events, and things that we do as part of marketing Mountain Lion or NEJA as an agency. These costs are covered by our advertising revenue, which also goes into the general. City of Flagstaff program, this is a combination of all of the city programs, so the bus, the paratransit, and the city taxi. Bulk of expenses, just like on the main graph, are salaries and benefits, with maintenance and operating being significantly higher, in large portion due to those fuel costs this year. We do track planning outside of our programs. Planning is paid for by the city of Flagstaff and other federal funding. You can see the majority of expenses on this is actually the capital planning, is a lot of our capital planning and carrying out of those capital projects. The operating expense was $324,000, total expense $2.1 million. We do capitalize wages as often as possible and put them right into our project costs, which are grant funded. And this should be our last slide. So this is a look at Coconino County's program budgets. They have those two small programs, the van pool and the county taxi. They've been great partners with the consistency of funding that they offer. These are small programs. We hope to continue to see ways of growing in the future. Their operating total was $63,000. There's no capital expenditures. Our van pool program is a turnkey program, which means the vendor brings those vehicles. We don't purchase them. They maintain them. We pay them to operate them. Nearly half of this was actually paid by ADOT's portion of CARES funding that they passed through to us. And that's everything that I have, and I will do my best to answer any questions you have for Josh.
Okay, questions from the TAC. So am I gathering that you want the TAC to take a motion in support of this, or
We
not?
do not need the TAC to take a motion. We will capture any comments that the TAC has about the report and our recommendation that the board approve it so that we can file it with the state accordingly.
Okay. All right, any comments from Dave?
Yeah, just, again, been at this for a while with y'all, so a reminder, you mentioned that fuel prices
Yes.
went up a lot.
Yes.
Nobody predicted the war in Ukraine or anything else that influences that. Is it the fund balance then that allows you, that you maintain, that allows you the resiliency to
Yes.
meet those needs?
So yes, and the fund balance is not really talked about in this report. So that's an interesting dynamic with our funding sources. The city of Flagstaff is the tax collector, right? So they actually maintain the fund balance. But yes, it is that fund balance that they hold that is dedicated to transit and transit services that gives us the resiliency to absorb these other budget items. I will tell you, we did end the year on budget, interestingly enough. So we had savings in other areas to even cover that percentage of increase. We did end the year for the city of Flagstaff off budget. So fares are lower than we budgeted. The city of Flagstaff has to absorb that change in revenues, if that makes sense.
Sales tax was higher.
So yes, we ended up asking for more money from the city of Flagstaff from the sales tax because we didn't have the other revenues that we thought we would have to cover the operating expense.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Other questions or comments? All right, I guess I just have one.
Yes.
The general fund,
Yes.
is about $10,000 was spent.
Yes.
Do you know what the fund balance is in that account now? Because I know money comes in from advertising.
I do not have that balance. in the-
I'll just be curious
Yes.
later.
I can't even tell you the last time I looked at it, so usually I'm keeping the numbers. Remembering that I don't recall that right now, but we can get back with you on it. I can tell you it's very healthy. It's well over $750,000.
Okay,
In the general fund balance, which is what we collect in advertising revenues. We don't have a lot of expenses out of it, and it is one of the ways, back to Dave's question, that we do create some resilience. If the transit tax wasn't able to cover an over budget, we could use those advertising revenues to offset that cost.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on then to the next item. And I believe that is busy Flagstaff in motion.
Chair, members of the Transit Advisory Committee, for some slides here. So I do apologize, we don't have cost estimates ready for TAC presentation today. They will be ready for the board presentation later this month. And at that time, I will send the slides out to the TAC. The recording will be available as well. And I would welcome any comments or questions that you have or individual conversations about some of those cost estimates of transit improvements. And as a reminder, the TAC will have an opportunity to provide guidance on transit improvements with cost estimates at the October advance. So I really look forward to bringing that to you at that time. I apologize, I don't have that ready for today. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So I'm gathering you don't need anything from the TAC on this item today. All right, and yeah, just want to make sure. So we're moving on to progress reports. Heather, what do you need from the TAC here?
So I don't need anything. If you have any questions on the capital planning progress report that was in the packet, please let us know. We'll put that on the agenda in the future, just really to keep you informed on where we're at with that process. But I do have a couple of things I'd like to highlight from current events since we have time. The current events is included in the packet this month. A couple of things I'd like to highlight. We did a Drive Flagstaff job fair event in cooperation with Northern Arizona University and Flagstaff Unified School District. If I understand correctly, we had about 4 candidates come to us through that job fair. That's pretty consistent with what we have been witnessing and experiencing with job fairs. We still believe that's a benefit. So we will continue focusing on ways to reach out to the community and make sure people are aware of those jobs. Our current driver status, we're about 10 drivers short of our full-time employment status. The complication is that we also have 5 drivers out on long-term medical leave. So that really leaves us 15 short in our 53 driver pool. So we continue to really focus on how can we ensure everybody is helping to reduce the overtime demand on our staff. We don't want to burn them out. The good news is we have 3 trainees that should graduate in the next couple of weeks, and a new class just started this morning with 2 trainees that I didn't even actually expect in my current events. And then we have another class starting in a couple of weeks. So we still remain very hopeful that by the end of October, it's about 2 weeks later than we were originally projecting, but that by the end of October, we will be pretty close to fully staffed. That is our hope. I will say in the current events I did not share, but we are short in other positions. We have had 1 mechanic position vacant for a full year now, and our HR manager vacancy is approaching a year. And that is really due to lack of qualified candidates, or when we identify a candidate, they withdraw because of cost of living in Flagstaff. A quick update on service. We did go back to service with Route 10 having 4 vehicles on it, but I will footnote that we stayed in reduced services on routes 4, 2, and actually on 10 as well. Normally there would be 5 buses on Route 10, and we are currently at 4. Our goal is to keep that in place until we get closer to that fully staffed scenario. Again, we're already asking for between 8 and 12 hours of overtime each week from our staff members. So we really need staff to return from their leaves and hire more staff. I don't feel comfortable asking for more overtime than we already are asking for. It was noted in the current events that we met with EDOT staff yesterday regarding the light that we are proposing at Phoenix and Milton Road that would be in coordination with our Downtown Connection Center. Our request has been denied twice. So we appealed to the highest appeal, yesterday. And I think Kate and I both agree it was a really positive conversation. So we feel more hopeful than we did walking into it. And we'll have news hopefully in the coming weeks on the outcome of that. We were also able to meet with staff from Senator Kelly's office at the Downtown Connection Center. He was here for the city's floodwater project and contacted us. We were able to walk him through the Downtown Connection Center, but also introduce him to some of the other projects. Senator Kelly has been very supportive of our funding ask, and we are grateful to have Mr. Russell here. Yes, and this Senator Kelly was key in the earmark that we received for the CDL testing and training course. Quick rundown of anniversaries, they're in your packet. 12 staff members representing 101 years of experience. And I will highlight Estella Hollander, who is regularly at these meetings, but not in her room, reached her 5th anniversary this month. We're so grateful to have her here on our planning team. Sam Short, who shared the safety message earlier, celebrating his 12th anniversary with us. And then we have a couple other employees with very long anniversaries. Grace Charlie serves in a paratransit role. And I will tell you, it says here Grace is reached her 14th anniversary, but Grace was here on iStart, and I have more than 20 years. So Grace took a break and came back and started over with us. If I had to estimate, I would bet Grace is really at close to 25 years with Mountain Line in a paratransit driving role. Carlos Lorenzo, who's currently an operations supervisor, started out as a driver for us 17 years ago. And Rich Philippe, our most senior, long-term senior, not age, driver, 17 years of service. So very excited to celebrate these anniversaries with staff. We will, at board meetings, be inviting staff with what we call milestone anniversaries, which are 5, 10, 15, and 20. They will be invited into board meetings to receive recognition of the board for those significant anniversaries. Those are the kind of milestones that we celebrate as an agency. And then the last thing I'd like to share, promotion. We started talking about a year ago how to create succession, an opportunity for succession planning and growth in our maintenance department. We've had mechanics for a long time, but just mechanics, just one job. So we started to diversify that out so that there's a ladder the staff can move through in those positions. Gavin Holzer worked for us as a bus detailer throughout COVID, but really started participating with our fleet team on learning the oil changes, the lights, and some minor mechanic duty. So we started with him, promoted him to assistant mechanic. That will be our lowest level in a tier of mechanic positions that hopefully provide that succession opportunity. He's excited, he's engaged, learning, and the mechanics who have been here a long time are very impressed with his interests and his abilities. So we're really looking to take next steps to build on that success, but congratulations to Gavin. That's my quick summary of current events.
Great, thank you, Dave.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, is your CDL still current?
No.
We volunteer.
I will tell you, if you work at Mountain Line and you have a CDL, you will be called on to drive a bus. We are providing, and even with the driver shortage, we are providing a service to Coconino County Fair this weekend, right? It will be different than we've ever provided it in the past. We have several staff who do not have CDLs. So we will be alternating between a bus and a paratransit vehicle. So we'll limit capacity on every other round, but it ensured that the CDL staff did not carry the brunt of that overtime work. So that was how we provided the service that was needed in a creative fashion to reduce the overtime. But we will be doing that service Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday.
Excellent, thank you.
Yes.
Great report. Any other comments from the TAC on that item? Or those items? Then I'm going to move on in the agenda. Just pointing out the board has an executive session, not something that involves the TAC. And then items from committee and staff. Heather, do you want to speak to these?
I think we just provided them as plans for future meetings. We would be happy to take any other suggestions or comments you have, but October will be our joint meeting, so there's no TAC meeting in October outside of the joint meeting. And we'll really be focused on some strategic items. Staff in motion, we're busy. a financial plan review with Josh, kind of those financial scenarios as an outcome of Flagstaff in motion, and then an update to our 2020 to 2025 strategic plan.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
I just want to point out as chair that, and I mentioned this to you, I won't be here on October 19th. And it looks like the next TAC meeting for this group is November 3rd.
That is correct.
Okay,
And then we'll have a recess in December.
all right. Well, then it looks like we're ready for adjournment. And unless there are objections,